I was trying to figure out how to bring James Luther Adams alive for us this morning. He lived the span of the 20th century, and I never met him, but he was a very influential theologian of liberal religion and Unitarian Universalism. He was a scholar. He was ordained a Unitarian minister, but he was a scholar. He had a career teaching at Harvard and Andover Newton Theological School and Meadville Lombard, which is the Unitarian Universalist Seminary in Chicago. He was known affectionately as JLA, James Luther Adams, JLA, and he taught at Meadville from 1937 to 56. And when I was a student at Meadville, my professors would speak glowingly of this man and how they would spend hours in the common room talking with James Luther Adams, JLA, and having deep discussions. He was a very brilliant yet humble man who would spend a lot of time with his students, which is not always a characteristic of an academic. Now, it's James Luther Adams who gave us the 5 smooth stones in his essay, Guiding Principles for a Free Faith. So let's go ahead and change the slide because the idea of the 5 smooth stones comes from this biblical story of David and Goliath. And it's told in 1 Samuel chapter 17. So you may be familiar with it as either maybe being raised Jewish or Christian. And it is the tale on the surface of the courageous underdog who wins out over a mighty foe. But the story itself goes that the Israelites were at war with the Philistines, and the two sides agreed to settle it by choosing one of the mightiest soldiers among them from each side and pit them in hand-to-hand combat. So they agreed that the losing side would become enslaved to the victor. Now the stakes are high. So the Philistines present their secret weapon, Goliath, a giant of a man, almost 7 feet tall. The Israelites present David, who is a young man and rather small in stature. And it seems that David has nothing more going for him than a promise from God that he will win this battle and become the king of the Israelites. Now, Saul is the erstwhile king, and he puts David in a suit of armor and gives David a big old sword. And David can hardly move. Right? He's rattling around in this armor that's way too heavy and too big for him, and he can't even really wield this sword very effectively. So he takes it all off, and he drops the sword, and he goes to confront Goliath. As he does, he picks up his sling. He has a slingshot and 5 smooth stones, as the story is told. Now, David, as some of you may know, was a shepherd. And so part of his duty as a shepherd, of course, is to protect the flock. And he did it with his slingshot. He would chase predators away. And so he's very good with it. And also, he was very brave. I mean, there were stories told of him of actually taking lambs from predators' mouths. So he picked up his sling and his 5 smooth stones and goes to confront Goliath, who is, posturing and huge and armored and has a huge sword. And Goliath taunts David, but David just says, basically, I'm on a mission from God, and he was very confident. So more posturing, and David just simply puts a stone in his sling, and with the first shot hits Goliath right in the forehead, and boom, he falls down. So this story is a segment of biblical history which established the Davidic line of Israel's kings. And this is important in the Christian tradition because it leads eventually to Jesus. And JLA would have known this story because he was raised by a Southern Baptist preacher, his father, who turned into a brother and elder. So a little bit different sect of Christianity that tends to be a little bit inward focused. So James Luther Adams would have known this story in that Christian tradition, but he was also a kind of a precocious young man, and as a teen, he was already questioning the practice of the brethren, as I said, as being a little bit insular and inwardly focused, which by itself, nothing wrong with that. But he had a sense, an inborn sense, that Christianity was a verb. So later, as a Unitarian scholar, JLA came to see this story as a metaphor for what he came to understand as the hallmarks of the liberal religion he practiced and taught. So liberal mostly means, I think, Unitarian Universalists. It might include some non-traditional or liberal Christian denominations, like perhaps our cousins, the United Church of Christ. I had a UCC minister say that, joke with me that they were Unitarians considering Christ. So very, very, very similar in their, or very liberal in their practice. So let's go on and see what that means according to James Luther Adams, because I think it's what he articulated in, the 20th century is very much, I think, how we understand our religion today. So for Adams, Saul represented the Christian religion wrapped up in the straitjacket of what he referred to as sealed revelation, so that when the story of Jesus' life ends, that is considered the last revelation of God, essentially. And with his life and his life story in the Gospels, there comes also a belief about Jesus and his life that involves what we call doctrine. It's an interpretation. And so Adams thought that this doctrine, or this sealed revelation, this kind of final word, was that weighty thing that you had to carry, right? That you couldn't get away from in living in this more modern contemporary world. So he also saw that, that David without the armor represented the nimbleness of a religion free of that doctrine and stifling tradition. So, as I said, Adams lived the whole of the 19th century. He was born in 1901 and he died in 1994. And as you know, during this span of time, there were 2 world wars, which profoundly shook people's belief in an all-powerful intervening God. The horrific wars dispelled the notion that with the modern era, humankind was on some kind of escalator of progress, moving to greater and greater improvement. And great theological thinkers of the 30s, Paul Tillich being one of Adams, he followed Tillich and held him in high esteem. They were beginning to form different concepts of God. I believe it was Tillich who referred to God as the ground of being. And so these new ideas, these mid 20th century theologians, they were putting forth ideas, compelling ideas that no longer fit into that straitjacket of doctrine. So that's the environment in which James Luther Adams found himself in. He actually became a humanist at one point, which means he rejected an idea of even a God or divinity. But then he later reconciled himself to liberal Christianity in the form of Unitarianism. So with this idea and this perhaps self-discovered or lived into idea that he could shed that doctrine, shed that armor, but yet practice what the notions that Jesus left us with. So let's look at the 5 stones and see if we can make some sense out of it. Now remember that he's an academic, right? And he is, he's wordy. I understand. So first he says, religious liberalism depends on the principle that revelation is continuous. Our cousins, the United Church of Christ, they have a saying that says God is still speaking. And regardless of your orientation to God or the divine or a higher power in that sense, we all continue to have experiences in life that form us and shape us. And that can happen at a level other than just the everyday and mundane, right? We can have a spiritual experience. And Events described in the words and deeds of sacred texts, they often point beyond themselves, and we make meaning of them in our own time, in our own context. That's what James Luther Adams thought. So that with the changing times, you would have a source of wisdom that might not be useful literally, but could be useful metaphorically and in a wisdom kind of way. Larger truths are always unfolding, and it's not enough to say what we reject in the way of worn-out dogmas. We must be responsible to continue to search for truth and meaning in our lives. Does that sound familiar? Where's that come from? Fourth principle. And we must search for ourselves the revelation that's ongoing. Now, the second stone, all relations between persons ought ideally to rest on mutual free consent and not on coercion. Well, relationships should be consensual and never coerced. And so this means also that faith can't be coerced. And so while there are some who want to be told what to believe, there are many others who want to experience or exercise a free inquiry. And I think a free inquiry into the deeds, words, and actions of prophets and saints of the ages, yes. And a hallmark of who we are today is that we do that with reason, tolerance, and humility. Adams also thought that loyalty and conviction should arise from open discourse. And he said, an unexamined faith is not worth having. The second stone also just suggests that we examine our faith together and are accountable to each other in our search for truth and meaning. We're not going to always agree on ultimate truth, and as a matter of fact, we don't. That's a hallmark of Unitarian Universalism, is that we don't agree on or have the same language of the divine or a common sacred scripture. What holds us together, the glue that holds us together, is covenant, the promise to walk our various paths together and to support each other in those, our spiritual journeys. It's a tough concept, right? How can we be united when we're so diverse in our beliefs? So covenant further requires a trust that can't be forced, and the time that we spend together in congregational life builds that trust. And finally, covenant requires love. I call it agape love, like big love, not romantic love, not even familial or filial love, but big, big love of humankind, of each other. And that has to persist through times of good times, bad times, fearful times. Third stone, religious liberalism affirms the moral obligation to direct one's effort toward the establishment of a just and loving community. And so that means social justice, being concerned with justice beyond our walls. But JLA said also we need to be like the prophets. We have to speak it. We have to let people know how we feel. Peace is a perfect example of that. The community organizer in Palm Beach County, of which we are a member, that is a way in which we are prophetic in speaking truth to power on behalf of those who either can't speak for themselves or are most affected by some inequity in society. The fourth stone. We deny the immaculate conception of virtue and affirm the necessity of a social incarnation. Well, this means that JLA thought you have to do good in order to be good, right? Good by itself doesn't do any good if it's not made active or real in the world, in your relationships. And so there again, that requires us to have the courage to take what we believe in living out our values in the world. We have to be courageous and speak it prophetically. And finally, he says that liberalism holds that the resources, divine and human, that are available for the achievement of meaningful change justify an attitude of ultimate optimism. So, in other words, we have to hang on to hope, right? And we have to hang on to it in such a way that what we ultimately might wish for in the way, if we lived out our 7 principles, if we could the whole world lived out the 7 principles perfectly, that we would have beloved community. We would have not a utopia. Martin Luther King Jr. told us, beloved community doesn't mean, heaven really. It means that we still have sickness, we still have natural causes that cause us suffering and sorrow, but we don't cause each other problems. So the idea of that beloved community is so far off, right? If you think about that in what we're living today, in the way of inequity, injustices, violence in our society, right? That feels like a long way off. And so Martin Luther King Jr. also said the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. So we have to be persistent in our faith, in the original blessing of a human being, and the good that we can generate, though we be flawed. And our spiritual practices can help connect us to that which is greater, and instill in us an ability to see beauty and feel love even as we witness the worst of human calamity. That's so important. Not to fall into despair. Ours is a prophetic religion that knows well the struggle between justice and injustice, yes, also knows that grace is always close at hand. So we keep our eyes wide open, looking for that grace. We are realists, but we're realists with big hearts. And we live life in all its complexities and work to make it joyful for ourselves and as many others as possible. So as you will see, as I said, academics are wordy. Sometimes I paraphrased James Luther Adams' 5 stones. And there's also red words in red next to it, right? So one of our foremost leaders in our larger Unitarian Universalist Association, Connie Goodbread, at one time she was the leader of the Southern region. She simplified this language and made the 5 smooth stones into 5 smooth words. So if you can remember joy, love, justice, courage, and hope, those words are descriptors of who we are as Unitarian Universalists. And I think that those words also link us because we are Congregationalists, we self-govern, we're an association of congregations, so that means that you're not going to get exactly the same thing in every Unitarian Universalist church you walk in the country. But I do believe that you will find at least joy, love, justice, courage, and hope. And that we can carry these words with us as we go out into the world and we resist injustice. We try to speak truth to power. We don't accept the status quo. And in many ways, we are countercultural. And it takes courage. For anybody who has ever been part of the activities that Peace, the community organizer in Palm Beach County, does, they go before the county council, and it is really scary. It's like meeting with Goliath. All those people, well, I'm assuming, this is what I'm familiar with, all these people are elevated, right? And they circle you, semicircle you, and you're down there on the floor with this microphone and you have 2 minutes to speak. That takes courage. So I hope that I'm making a connection with last Sunday in talking about how we can't do this alone, we need to do it together. And that James Luther Adams says that by your groups you shall be known. So in other words, he says, you're not going to change the world alone. You need to do it together, and you're better together. And in a time when togetherness is falling apart, and we don't have a unified voice to speak out against some of the injustices that are created, both historically and in current times, by forces I think have a lot to do with overconsumption and a consumerist economy. But anyway, we all know that we have all lived forever. We need to question, always we need to question power. And especially when power is not seeing or ignoring the problems that it creates. So let hope, love, justice, courage, and joy be part of your personal mission and identity as a Unitarian Universalist. And for all those who are visiting, either to maybe understand who we are, or maybe you're interested in becoming Unitarian Universalist, then these words are bywords for us. And When we carry them in our hearts and we live them out and we make them verbs, we can grow in spirit and become a community which speaks volumes to the world and invites all who would walk with us to join in working toward that beloved community. And may it be so for us all. Thank you.